Hello and welcome to Public Forum. In Public Forum today, we are going to look at two important issues, the one relating to pollution, air pollution specifically, and the other one regarding call drops. Let's first look at the issue of air pollution. Air pollution, including environmental and household air pollution, has emerged as a leading risk factor for stroke worldwide, with unclean air now blamed for nearly one-third of the years of healthy life lost to the conditions prevailing around the globe. In an unprecedented survey of global risk factors for stroke published in the Lancet Neurology journal, air pollution in the form of the fine particulate matter ranked 7th in terms of its impact on healthy lifespan, while household air pollution from burning solid fuels ranked 8th.
Indian cities are breathing foul air. This has been suggested by several reports in recent years. Air pollution is pegged as the 5th leading cause of death in the country. The National Air Quality Index Network was announced last year by the government as an official reporting standard for air pollution levels that would allow for comparisons across cities. The data from government's monitors in cities like Patna, Raipur, Agra and Varanasi reveals that pollution levels are off the chart in many cities, and that in the absence of strong measures, the problem isn't likely to go away anytime soon. Last year, Delhi alone was found to have pollution levels 12 times higher than the WHO guidelines, while another 6 cities, Lucknow, Faridabad, Ahmedabad, Kanpur, Agra and Varanasi, had pollution levels at least 10 times higher than permissible levels. Delhi government tried to improve the city's air quality by regulating the number of cars on the streets. But was that enough? Going by the recent WHO report, the national capital is now the 11th most polluted city in the world. But it is important to note that the total energy consumption in Delhi has risen by 57% from 2001 to 2011. It is also expected that the number of road vehicles in Delhi will increase to 26 million by 2030. Clearly, a knee-jerk response to the crisis may not be enough. Something more needs to be done to ensure that our cities become a pollution-free zone.
But Delhi is no longer the world's most polluted city. Well, that's what the recent survey by the WHO, in fact, reveals. But the report by WHO also suggests that global urban air pollution levels have increased by about 8% despite improvements in some regions. To talk more on this, I'm joined by Mr. Vivek Chattopadhyay, Air Pollution Control Program Manager from Center for Science and Environment, and Ms. Aditi Kapoor. She's Director, Policy Advocacy and Partnerships from Alternative Futures. Welcome to the program. I'd like to start the discussion with you, Mr. Vivek Chattopadhyay. What about the number of reports which have come out, in the last few months or a couple of years that we have seen regarding the air pollution scenario? Let's first look at it globally, and then maybe we can look at Indian cities in particular.
Globally, if you look at the major study that has happened, wherein your World Health Organization and about 400 medical and research institutions are involved, that study is called Global Burden of Disease Study, and that is done every 10 years. So, last data that emerged in 2012, it clearly says that air pollution is so enormous problem that it has emerged as a first environmental health risk in terms of impact on the human health, and you can say premature mortality, morbidity and all that. And in fact, in India, you can say that it's the gravity of the problem is such that it is 5th largest killer among all the reasons. So, I think this is the enormity of the issue, and recent studies like this stroke study that has Lancet has come out. This clearly shows that no longer it is the lungs that are affected. People have generally think that our body's lungs are getting impacted, lung cancer or the respiratory problems, but it's no longer that. It's enormous problem where the people are dying because of a stroke. Air pollution is linked with the blood pressure, high blood pressure, diabetes too, and you name it. I think it has become a major issue, not only in India, across Asia. Many cities are fighting for it, and if you talk about India, then there are very few cities which have clean air, you can say, in terms of air quality standards. So, I think it's a great problem.
And these air quality standards, we're talking about the international standards?
International standards are very stringent. World Health Organization's guidelines. Those are far away from our regulatory regime, but our air quality standards are aligned with the WHO guidelines.
Okay.
You can say interim targets, but still we are not meeting those targets.
But what about, Delhi was first seen as the pollution levels were about 12 times higher the international standards or the WHO guidelines. But now the WHO says that Delhi is no longer the world's polluted city, rather it places it at number 11th. The 11th most polluted city.
World Health Organization never ranks the cities. It provides the information in terms of data,
okay.
PM10 and PM2.5.
All right.
So they had provided 1600 cities data, and this time they had provided 3000 city data. And if you rank that, like people want to know that where their city rank. So in that ranking, it is a relative ranking. So always there will be ups and downs. But if you look at in totality, that most of the Indian cities appear in among the polluted city list. So definitely it's a major issue, and I think our efforts have clearly not showing that kind of impact that would we must have seen.
But you see, one of the critical things, Aditi, was to see and to tap as to how polluted are our Indian cities. And has the air quality index and some other measures really helped us in understanding as to what the pollution levels are in our cities?
Well, technically speaking, yes, at least we are able to assess. But really speaking, I think it all depends on how much focus the policymakers give to various pollution levels. So for instance, if you're talking about water pollution, the impacts are more directly seen, faster. So, there would be a greater focus over there. But as far as air pollution measures are there, the measures themselves have been coming out in public spaces since I think, I don't know, a decade and a half or 2 decades, But I don't think that it's really helped in galvanizing the government to do something about it. And I'd just like to shift the discussion a bit to say that considering we've been using a lot of fossil fuel, these, this kind of the smog that Delhi sees, the kind of emissions, that vehicular emissions that come out, this was like a time bomb that was waiting, So it's just that we are now discussing it too late. I think we should have been discussing this 15 years back, the way the vehicles have been increasing and the way the industrial units have been coming up, especially the SME sector, the small and medium sector. So I don't think that, really speaking, these measures have really helped in tackling air pollution. We wouldn't be here if they had.
But, what is the way out? Because after all, let's say a state government like the one in Delhi had decided that they'll go ahead with an odd-even plan. It may have worked on certain days. There could have been some sort of a change in the air quality index, some positive signals. But what is the way out? In our country, we haven't seen that kind of optimism around cutting down vehicles, or maybe cutting down diesel usage in vehicles and other usages. So what could be an answer?
So 2 things. One, this is kind of a knee-jerk reaction, because you cannot reduce it to just reducing the number of vehicles on the road. Yes, of course. I mean, at one level, it makes sense that if only half the cars are going to be out, the pollution levels are going to be less. But how much are those vehicles which are not going to be on the road causing pollution? Minuscule. Yeah. So the actual result, you're not going to see any result, which is what various studies have proven, that it was not enough. The other thing is a larger solution, which is that you need to look at several things. And so, for instance, if you want to take cars off the road, you first need to make sure that you have enough public transport.
True.
And you have clean fuel for that, and stringent measures. I think one of the things that India really lacks in is stringent measures, stringent standards. We somehow are too lax about it. And related to this is that our policies have always favored private cars to public transport. Even if from my office, if I want to take a loan to buy a car, I can get a soft loan, maybe an interest-free loan to buy a car. But if I was to take public transport, then my travel allowance would be far less. So I think there are these incentives and disincentives that, that really need to be reworked, so that at the policy level, you're favoring clean fuel, you're favoring public transport, and you're disfavoring diesel run taxis or private cars.
The services have to be improved. They have to be, of course, we all claim to be a world-class, we are actually ambitious that we want to have world-class infrastructure, then why not have these world-class services too? Well, Mr. Chattopadhyay, how do you look at the various factors that contribute to pollution? And if for the benefit of our viewers, you can explain the PM 2.5 and the PM 10, what exactly it is? I mean, if one would have to understand it, is it difficult to comprehend?
No, it's not that difficult, because it is basically a combination of different pollutants, and pollutant can be like your exhaust, vehicular fumes, and it can be a semi-solid, solid particulates, and it also combines various toxins. So, for example, diesel soot is a fine particulate. So, it is less than 1 micron, and when you talk about micron, so just to have a comparison, human hair has a diameter of 60 micron. So, one can understand that PM 2.5 is such a small particle, and these particles can get deep into the lungs, and the small particles have more impact, and in fact the strokes and the other like severe impacts are linked with the small particles. So,
grime is the most obvious part of pollution. Are these particles in the dust and the grime? Is that so?
Yeah, there are two kind of particles. First comes from the combustion sources. For example, when we burn coal, diesel, fuel oil, this kind of things, or we burn biomass, then we have the crustal particles, for example, natural dust or the road dust, which are bigger in size. They contain your silica and other toxics which get deposited on them, because in the cities even the natural dust itself is polluted, because there are so much emissions happen.
That's right.
So, that is the reason that these particulates, the smaller, and they remain suspended, and they can travel long distance. For example, if the pollution is happening in Punjab, the fire stubble burning is happening, it can travel to the places. And if I give you the example of the way our citizens are living close to the pollution sources, Delhi has 21% of the area under roads, and your road network is about 36,000 kilometers, and about 60% of the people live close to the roads, within 300 to 500 meter distance. So, we are directly exposed to that fumes. So, your proximity to the source matters, and what kind of source that is. So, that is the reason our cities have to be very judicious about the kind of fuel they use.
And then the garbage is burnt,
garbage
dry leaves are burnt,
yeah.
Plastic is burnt, rubber is burnt.
Yeah, these are the major problems, and I think it's not a rocket science. I guess we have progressed so far in science and technology. We know that what are the issues which are causing the problem, but we don't give value to the solution.
And
our health.
Do let's say dead animals, garbage, open sewage, drains, do they also lead to some sort of pollution?
Yes, your recent studies have in fact shown that the Yamuna river remains polluted, and the nalas crisscross the city. They emit hydrogen sulfide gases, untreated sewage. So, that damages, corrodes the railway lines overhead. So, it like all forms of gases and pollutants are there. The list is a long list, but in summary one can say that okay, you target the fossil fuels, you target the plastic, biomass burning, all these are the major sources. Definitely we have to clean up the rivers also, because that is also leading to emissions which is causing the damages. So, there is a wide gamut of sources in the cities.
Okay, Aditi, how about afforestation was always pegged as one of the best answers to all these problems. Plant more trees, you're going to save your generations to come. But is it really happening on that front? There is this green campaign which is run by every city, not just in Delhi, but you go to any other region and you'll find that state governments have initiated it. But how do you look at the pace with which we are approaching it?
Is there a pace? I'm not too sure whether there is a pace, but you're very right. This was exactly what I was thinking, that one of the solutions definitely lies in greening the city. We keep reading about these what are called heat island effects, which happen in cities, because a lot of the pollutants, if there are green areas, then they'll be cooler. because the micro environments, like in fact, you mentioned that the micro environments matter a lot.
Yeah.
So maybe, your New Delhi area will be less polluted than, say, somewhere in East Delhi, or, people who are living around a landfill. So I think the green areas which are over there are one of the buffer zones where they absorb a lot of the pollutants, but where there are more buildings, the buildings don't reflect any of these heat which comes. It makes it even hotter, doesn't absorb any of the pollutants. So I think definitely there is a need to look at both in terms of reducing your emissions and your pollutants, but there's also a need to see how we can actually plant more trees, reduce this whole effect of, we cannot live without emitting.
Yeah.
There will be pollutants.
Right.
But what do you do to really make it better? I think definitely we need to be far more green. Like I'm saying, I'm repeating again in terms of fuel that we're using, but also in terms of greening the city.
But what are the impediments there on that front? What is it that we need to do? We have good infrastructure plans. Now we also have a Clean India mission, a Swachh Bharat mission. Do you think that, putting all this together can at least pave way for a better and a brighter and a more livable cities?
I think these programs needs to go deep into the issues. I guess when you talk about the solid waste management or the waste management that we see, every time we see that our Delhi's landfill sites are being burned, and they are naturally burning sometime because of the methane emissions that is happening, or deliberately being burned. So I think the way to manage the waste is I think remains rudimentary system in India. There is no technology, there is no thinking behind it. Swachh Bharat is very good initiative. It shifts the garbage from one place to another place. But we need to treat the
garbage treatment is the main important thing.
At the source.
Okay.
So we need to reduce the garbage generation from the source. And I think the plastic has been banned in several places. The users are targeted, the sellers are targeted. Why don't you stop the manufacturing? Why don't you put the heavy charges on the manufacturing?
So is it true, Vivek, that whatever amount of plastic was, let's say, used decades ago in this country has not moved out of this country, and we have become one of the dumping yards also of plastic and all the plastic waste?
It is.
It is very much.
It is burned and it is being dumped. There is no treatment, and recycling happens, but it gets recycled, and I think the plastic never dies.
Lately, we've heard of some private entities, coming up and doing some sort of, some sort of recycling and involving with communities in the garbage treatment exercise. Has it really worked?
It helps. I think the informal sector helps in the recycling in a big manner, but I think recycling is a solution when the waste has already been generated. So as much as it is being recycled, they move it away, but rest of the waste goes and gets dumped. So I think we need to deal at the source, because there are no places where you can dump the waste. Hardly you have any place, and the solution that people often find that to burn the waste, and that generates toxic fumes. You talk about dioxin, carcinogens, enormous list. So I think we have to deeply get into these issues.
One of the critical things about cities are that they are overpopulated. There are hardly any spaces. That is why no distance between roads and the places where one stays. How to really go about it? There are infrastructural issues. There are job-related issues. There are accommodations which are a problem. Then there's traffic management. Aditi, do you think that we need to have a very holistic approach? Air pollution is not just about air and pollution. It's not just an environment ministry related subject. It's a subject that concerns us all, and maybe all the ministries.
No, absolutely. And I think, we do need a holistic approach, of course, because there is a rule which says that you cannot burn leaves. But we find that in all DDA and MCD parks, leaves are being burnt. I'm sure they're not private citizens who are burning those leaves. And, they must be the government people, the Malis, who must be doing it, because there's no place to dump those leaves. Where do you take them? And the government can easily take an initiative and actually compost them and use that in the park itself, which is already happening in Bangalore on a big way.
Okay.
So it's not as if there are, like what Vivek said is really true, that the solutions and the technologies are with us. But when you said that, the stringent measures, if you're measuring them, has it helped? It hasn't, because nobody is willing to actually walk
But
the talk.
there could be some good examples, Aditi, maybe
Yes.
that you can
Yes.
share with us, where
Absolutely.
we have seen communities and cities really doing well.
Absolutely. Bangalore, for instance, has been doing this. It's actually, even on water, for instance, it's recycling a lot of its water. It's harvesting a lot of the water. In buildings, residents are getting together to harvest the water. It started out by one institution, by one passionate person, kind of pushing, but until and unless the government was involved, it did not yield any results. So at the end of the day, like you're saying, everybody has to do it. So definitely that's there. Even in solid waste management, the parks, there's a rule that you will only use recycled water, and you will only use the compost that you make yourself to actually, in that garden, to green that garden. So I think these solutions are definitely there. The other thing that I'd like to say is that what we really need to do is to have a more zonal planning, look at different areas and what are the problems and how do you kind of deal with them, and decentralize some of the solutions, involve the resident welfare associations, get them introduced to, the garbage pickers, because, organize the garbage pickers. There are NGOs who are doing it. The first step happens in disaggregating the garbage in your homes. How many of us have 2 or 3 dustbins to actually segregate the garbage? If you're going to put plastics with all your kitchen waste, obviously, somewhere or the other, things are going to get contaminated. If you throw it, then the water is going to get contaminated. So I think there's a need to start from ourselves. What is it that we need to do? And it's really important for the civic councillors. The councillors, I don't know what they do, frankly, in Swachh Bharat too. But really, if each one of them starts with their own constituency, and if some incentives can be given by the Delhi government to, give a prize to the best, or if the media highlights
Delhi,
it,
but
or whatever.
I'm sure. Yeah,
I thought this was, on Delhi.
No,
but,
certainly
but this
not.
can happen everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. But we know that, because I'm sure, because we are all stationed in Delhi, we know what we go through every single day.
Absolutely.
But Vivek, how about, people can always act if they have proper knowledge about it. There's a lot of pollution scare now, but are people evenly aware of the reasons or the things that contribute to this poisoned air in which they live?
The problem is, like, people go by the economic benefit. I'll just give you the example of the diesel. Diesel was taxed less, and before it was government used to support the price so that the prices can be kept low for the poor people and the farmers and the freight traffic. But in fact, the data, government's own data, showed that more than agriculture sector, the diesel is consumed by the private cars. Why that subsidy, which is intended to give to the some user, which is needed, it's being diverted there, and nobody acted on it for a long time. And now we are facing that our car sector is dieselized. Now we are talking that there will be a ban on cars. There will be ban on diesel cars. It's global problem.
Yeah.
Europe also did that.
That's right. Some
and they are
countries
facing
went
the
ahead
same
with
problem.
that. Right.
So it's I think when we know the things, then our taxation, our policies have to reflect the concerns.
And how do you think the communities here?
Yeah, people will get the message when the policy message gives them the right thing. For example, when you tax the dirtier fuel higher, then they will get the message that this is dirtier fuel. So if you burn more, then you are.
And do you think we can be hopeful about it, or are we too late in the day to act on all these things?
Definitely we can be hopeful. This can be done in a day or in a next budget, or government can always take decisions. And I think the major thing that cities are failing to do is public transport. It's totally like we have a lot of focus on metro, but metro cannot solve the problem in all the cities.
Yeah.
Like Jaipur, Chandigarh, they don't need metro today. They don't have that kind of ridership, but we are focusing on the metro.
Yeah.
But our bus system, our other smaller systems
the
are being
connectivity
neglected.
between the metro stations and also homes.
Yeah,
I
it's
think that's
being
a very
neglected.
crucial thing.
And when your smaller cities are growing, and if you don't tackle, don't plan then once it becomes a Delhi kind of city, then undoing the things is major problem than doing the things right.
Fine. So it's an issue of urban planning, management, garbage, sewage management, and a lot of policies can be put together in order to address this very big environmental challenge that we all face, which is the issue of air pollution. The air we breathe is poisoned, and that is something which concerns us all. Thank you very much for joining me in this program. Time for a very quick break now in Public Forum, and after the break we'll look at another important issue that's at least really causing a lot of trouble for the urban users, customers in major cities, the issue of call drops. More discussion on that after this break. Welcome back. In Public Forum now, we look at the issue of call drops. The telecom industry has assured the government that it is doing its best and will continue its efforts to check the menace of call drops. The operators have now proposed to put more money and install more towers. The government earlier had said that it will try to resolve all the teething issues like right-of-way, checking illegal repeaters and cross-border interference in signals. But the one thing consumers would like to know is that would the problem of call drop be over soon?
In a fresh development on the call drops issue, the telecom operators have presented their 100-day plan to the telecom department for improving service quality. The mobile operators have committed to invest about 12,000 crore to install 60,000 towers to check call drops. The companies also raised issues hampering improvement in the networks, one of them being high congestion. The government, on the other hand, is checking out if all call drops are due to congestion. Companies claim that the problem is exacerbated by the ceiling of telecom towers in the cities by municipalities. Amidst this, one of the options being explored is to provide some rebate on telephone bills for call drops. Though the Supreme Court last month struck down TRAI's call drop compensation proposal. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India in 2015 had asked telecom companies like Vodafone, Airtel and Reliance Communications to incentivize consumers amid concerns over growing call drops across the country. Telecom operators have been demanding a national tower policy to address the issue. But the problem will further deteriorate if the operational difficulties are not tackled.
And to discuss more on this, I'm joined by Mr. Mahesh Uppal, who is an expert on telecom regulation. And I'm also joined by Dr. Rajat Kathuria, who's Director and Chief Executive, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. Welcome to the program. Let me start the discussion with you, Mr. Uppal. How do you look at the developments on the issue of call drops? And do you think that the telecom companies would stick to a 100-day plan? They'll be able to exercise it, then there will be some sort of a resolution of this problem?
Well, I'm hopeful. The problem is very pervasive. It's very real. We all know the calls are dropping. But I think its causes are also very diverse. And I think the operators probably can do a part of what is required to be done to get rid of call drops. One hopes that they will do that and a bit more than that. But clearly there are other actors and other issues in this. And your own clip actually highlighted some of them relating to, for instance, towers, spectrum, etc.
That's right.
And there is also another thing which is often missed is that wireless communications itself is prone to many such difficulties that we commonly encounter. For instance, if you are in a basement, anybody and everybody, I believe, would know that in their own homes or in their own offices, there are points where the cell reception is better than the other places or vice versa. So I think we have to be realistic. But the real issue is that it is something that many players will have to come together to solve. And yes, I think the operators are the key players in this, and they will have to do what they are saying they are going to do, and one hopes they will.
How do you look at the role of the regulator here?
Well, I personally have been rather critical of the role of the regulator, I must confess. I think he is right in highlighting the issue but not in the methods that the regulatory body has shared with the people or has suggested. And as you know, as you mentioned, the Supreme Court was also not particularly comfortable with the compensation package. And I do believe that that is the wrong way to go about it.
But it has in fact suggested some very stringent measures too.
Yes, but you see, the point is that, for instance, we also, I mean, pretty much on the scale of telephone calls, we also use SOAP, but we don't need a regulator for that. The market works, right? There is anybody who doesn't give you good quality leaves, you have a choice. You decide to buy another brand of soap or go to another shop. And that should be possible even with telecoms, because we have a large number of players. We have all kinds of options. Any city in India has roughly 7 to 10 players offering you services. And the fact that this competition is not working and is not leading to an improvement in quality of services, that I think is the regulatory question.
I think that's an important thing to look at. Why is the competition not working, Dr. Kathuria? Let's understand that too.
Well, I think it's an issue that affects everybody. It is kind of across the board. So I think you're not competing in a sense. You're competing on other issues, but this issue of call drops relates to, I mean, so many issues that confront all the operators: right of way, spectrum, towers. So it's not that the operators don't want to provide good quality services and thereby be able to compete with one another and provide, and try and differentiate from each other. But when an issue confronts everybody, then it's difficult to compete on, let's say, on quality, when it's difficult to get the right inputs to provide good quality. And I would say competition in telecom has worked in the past. And it will continue to work in the future. But one good way to try and establish the cause for the quality of service, i.e. call drops, would be to say, okay, let's look at what is it that is causing call drops in urban areas where the problem is more intense and prevalent, and versus rural areas where you don't have the same problems that you have in urban areas, i.e. you don't have really a shortage of spectrum, there's not so much congestion, you have fewer towers, but your, I think, line of sight goes much further and interference is relatively less. So if we are able to do, well, not in a rural area, in a kind of peri-urban area, or not as dense an urban area as Delhi and Mumbai, and let's repeat those experiments or those surveys that the regulator has done in Delhi and Mumbai, and see whether the quality of service is any better there. And my sense is that in those areas the quality of service should be better. That's a hypothesis. It can be accepted or not. And then we'll be able to establish the causes, and then let's try and work to try and relieve those constraints that operators are facing. I mean, one can always say that you haven't invested enough in towers, you haven't invested enough in equipment, you haven't invested enough inside buildings, there are no kind of micro cells in buildings. I mean, those are things that I'm sure that given competition, everybody would want to do, because these are fat customers.
And there are
Delhi and Mumbai are good customers. These are the high revenue paying subscribers.
What about the operational problems that the operators face here? While they would say that they would like to put in more money, have more towers, is it going to be that easy?
No, it's not. No, and which is why it's not a problem that can be resolved by the operators themselves. It's a problem that has to be addressed both by, I think, the policymaker, as well as there are a number of other bodies. It's not just the regulator, TRAI. I think there are a number of bodies that need to sit across the table and see, do you want to rid ourselves of the menace of call drops? And if you want to rid yourselves of the menace of call drops, then it has to be a joint effort, not only the regulator and the policymaker, but it has to also be some of the municipal bodies, because the municipal bodies have to be involved in this, and they have to see.
And have the reports of these towers causing health, the health concerns around these towers, especially them being in the residential area, which is of course very important, because after all, people living in their houses may be finding it very troublesome these days to connect to their near and dear ones or their friends over the phones. So has that also had an impact on the whole tower thing, sir?
Yes, it would seem so. In fact, the operators offline are all talking about that, which is that people who were vying with each other to have towers on their rooftops 20 years ago, because it was a nice source of additional revenue for them, are now equally desperate to get rid of many of them, because somebody has told them that they for some reason believe that this is causing them harm, whether it is due to radiation or whatever. And in fact, I hear there are instances where neighbors are putting pressure on people to get towers removed. So it is becoming quite a challenge for the operators also.
And the operators have been demanding a national tower policy. What is that?
Yeah, exactly. Because the national tower policy, as Dr. Kathuri also alluded to, is related to the fact that there are multiple agencies that determine where a tower can be put and what it costs to erect it in certain places. For example, the price of erecting a tower in Tamil Nadu is a fraction of what it costs in Haryana, right? The time it takes to install a tower in some regions is a fraction of what it takes elsewhere, because there are all kinds of for example, some municipal agencies look at it as a source of very significant income for them, and others probably are much more keen to facilitate the infrastructure. So these are things that actually make it very, very difficult for operators. Plus the fact that this is historically an area where the governance is poor. So there are any number of allegations of corruption and bribes and this and that. All this means that the smoothness with which infrastructure should come up is no longer guaranteed. And given now this additional pressure that there are people who are in fact less willing to have towers than they used to be, that also means that we as a community has to pay that price. You know, we can't have it both ways.
So when they say that it's congestion, is it about less towers and more subscribers of a particular network, or is it different from that?
No, I mean, you have kind of on the demand, if your demand is increasing and your supply is constant, I mean, something will have to give.
Right.
And what gives in this case is the quality of service. And let me just go back to the question that you asked earlier. So why aren't service providers competing on this attribute, on quality? And I'm sure they would like to, because when you have 7 or 8 operators in a circle and there's intense competition, they would like to compete on everything. They would like to compete on price, they would like to compete on quality, they would like to compete on the quality of other services that they give you. But there's very little that they can do on quality, especially in urban areas with respect to call drops, because everybody is facing congestion. Subscribers are growing very rapidly. Of course, thankfully, they are not growing at the rate that they were growing in 2009 and 10, at the rate of, astronomical 20 million subscribers were being added. You can, take off a few percentage, but that's the order of magnitude that was happening in 2010. And, subscribers were growing very, very rapidly. Of course, the growth has to taper off and has plateaued, and in some cases even going down for some operators, because there's some churn happening. But thankfully, subscribers are not growing at the rate and they were growing. But another thing has happened is that voice that used to take very little bandwidth is now giving way to data, which occupies much more bandwidth. So you're going to face additional problems of a crunch of bandwidth. You have to carry the your data, or you have to carry the traffic up to a point before you can offload it to a cable. But I mean, spectrum does play a role in carrying of data as well, and it is much more data intensive than voice, which is why we are getting 3G and 4G.
That's right.
So spectrum, I think it's not always that the operators are crying wolf and looking for excuses. I mean, sometimes they may be saying something which is genuine. And one has to then, I'm
so
sure
in a way it was important for the Supreme Court to struck down that compensation plan?
I think for two reasons, and I have written about this in a newspaper article. I think to implement it would be enormous challenge. And there's a principle in the tax literature, there's a principle in general economics. If it costs more for you to kind of administer something, don't do it, because it's going to end up creating distortions in the system. And this is the point that I mean, your heart may be in the right place, you may be for the consumer, and you want to give consumer, due kind of quality for what he's paying, but it's going to be a monumental task to try and enforce it, and there are going to be a lot of type 2 errors in this, which is, you know, people who are actually not suffering will also want compensation, and to distinguish between the good and the bad would become very difficult.
As it
already you are putting enough pressure on the operators, and regulatory pressure on the operators, in the sense of you know, burdens on spectrum and fees and so on. You don't want another kind of administrative burden that you can do well without.
Okay, Mr. Uppal.
Yeah, no, I think Dr. Kathuria is absolutely right. And in fact, let me just go one step further. You see, now it's absolutely true that we have spectrum issues, etc. But take, for instance, the kind of market we have. I mean, if really it was a question of only private operators not investing enough, then what, for instance, prevents the state operators from taking advantage of that? I mean, Delhi, for example, and then every part of India has a state operator as well.
Right.
You would have thought that this would be the perfect situation for them. They're all currently laggards in the marketplace. They're 5th, 6th, 7th in the marketplace. You would have thought that here is an opportunity. Your spectrum is less stretched. Your networks are less congested. You should be able to do something about it. But in fact, the parameters for quality of services are no better. In fact, it's probably slightly worse than the average. Same thing, I mean, for instance, we have operators like Telenor, which are relatively recent entrants into the market. Now, you would have thought that they have the spectrum in places where they do have it, that they would have you know, taken advantage of this. But they haven't been able to, which I think suggests what Dr. Kathuria is also suggesting, I think, which is that the problem is a much larger one. It is not simply a question of an operator you know, not doing what is obviously easy to do. It is not.
Mr. Uppal, in our country, it's also more about perception. The perception usually is towards the provider.
Oh,
and the person, you know, who is,
it would be,
the operators. So do you think it's very obvious for every other person to point a finger at the operator and see that it's their job to provide the thing and their job to also compensate? So a lot of optimism towards the other side.
No, I couldn't. It would be naive to suggest that operators are blameless. I don't think that is even remotely the case. I think operators are as much a part of the problem as many others are. And I think we need to recognize that, because if we don't recognize it, we don't solve the problem.
Right.
Because, I mean, if it was for just one actor to intervene and solve the problem, then it wouldn't have been possible. Yeah.
But let's look at this aspect, Dr. Kathuria, something which I asked Mr. Uppal too. The relation between a regulator and, of course, an operator. It is very obvious that they won't share a bonhomie that way, because the regulator's job is to regulate the operator. But do you think that the tussle here has gone a little far in this particular case? Or how do you think that they can be brought on the same page?
Well, I think there has to be a discussion between the regulator and the operator. But I mean, there will never be a kind of bonhomie between a regulator and a service provider, and I don't think there ought to be. I mean, they should be distant. There should be a professional relationship between the two. On this specific issue, I think the regulator on call drops, because it is regulating the quality of service, I think both the regulator as well as the service providers could do much more. And in the sense, the name and shame is a positive way for the regulator to go about it, and hope that competition will then. So once you've named and shamed the operators, or named the operators who are not providing good quality of service, you would expect then customers would have a look at that and say, okay, access quality is better, so given mobile number portability, I have the opportunity to move to the other operators. But that's the point, that's the first question you asked me, and I said, everybody's suffering from the same problem. So you're kind of going from the frying pan into the fire, you're going from one bad quality to another bad quality. So I think there's something that needs to.
So it's going to be more difficult for the operators in days to come, do you think so?
So I think the problem could get worse before it gets better. The solutions are not. I think the solutions are known. I mean, in the sense that you need to give operators more spectrum. You need to make it easier for them to get right of way to kind of towers, notwithstanding the environmental consideration. There ought to be kind of some policy that guides towers, and I think this will not happen overnight. This will take a long time. So on the regulators' part, things have to be eased in the sense that provision of the necessary ingredients or the inputs have to be made more efficient, and the operators for themselves have to also then think that whether the networks are ready to accept as many subscribers that are coming onto the network. Of course, when somebody is coming to buy something from you and you have a sunk asset, or not a sunk asset, you have an asset which can cater to them, which lies idle for some parts of the day and is used in some parts of the day, the kind of incentive structure is that, okay, let me get him onto the network and we will deal with the problems later.
Mr. Uppal, I'll take concluding remarks from you on this. We have this massive Digital India campaign too. The idea is to have 100% digital connectivity. At the same time, we want to see that there are affordable services available to people. Do you think that the present round of discussions on call drops and the issue, is it really going to make things complicate things, or do you think that we need to really find quick answers to this?
Well, I think let's be a bit more positive about it. I think this kind of a discussion on call drops has also, ironically, also highlighted what the actual issues are, and one hopes that all those people who are working on Digital India and want it to succeed
and 100% mobile penetration,
would recognize the complexity of the problem. It's also true that another problem that we have, in addition to what we've already heard, is also that India is a predominantly wireless dependent country. We have virtually no fixed line, barely 3 crores out of our 100 crores of our connections are fixed line. So the point is, in other countries, we have multiple networks. In our country, whether it is mobile, whether it is telephony, whether it is data, we are totally dependent on wireless to a large extent. Now, unless we recognize and therefore incentivize the creation of other networks,
we won't be able to achieve it.
We will have a capacity issue, and we will.
So the bottom line, I think, remains is that we have to do away with the operational difficulties in order to ensure that this problem and its solution can be approached. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me. That's all for today in Public Forum. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.